I want you to picture a number. And I want you to really try to visualize it. Because when we get to figures this size, they just get abstract.
They do. They stop feeling like money.
Yeah, they just look like a long string of zeros. The number is $1.9 billion.
It is a number that demands a double take. It really is.
It really does. To be precise, let's call it $1.88 billion.
Okay.
That is the amount of grant funding awarded by King County's Department of Community and Human Services, or DCHS, just between the years 2023 and 2024.
And to put that staggering sum into perspective for everyone listening, because, billion is a word we throw around a lot these days.
Right.
If you look back at just the 2019 and 2020 period, that figure was around $922 million.
So it doubled.
It effectively doubled in a very, very short window. It wasn't just a faucet being turned on. This was a veritable fire hose of money being unleashed.
And the pitch for this money, the reason the tap was open so wide was incredibly noble. I want to be really clear about that up front. This was for Best Starts for Kids. It was for youth diversion programs. It was meant to build safer communities, to stop the school-to-prison pipeline. The mission statement was, to save lives.
Precisely. That was the promise. The intent was undeniable, and on the surface, it's something every single citizen wants. But today, we are looking at the promise. We are looking at the receipts. Or, as we're about to find out, the total lack of them.
Right. We are doing a deep dive into the 2025 audit of the DCHS, along with a heavy stack of investigative reporting from places like KUOW, FOC X13, and some truly blistering editorial analysis from J425.
Yeah.
And what we're finding isn't just a spreadsheet error here or there. This isn't about someone losing a receipt for a stapler or a business lunch.
No, it's much darker. And frankly, it's much more systemic than that.
Yeah.
The auditor's office, and these are people who are usually very, very measured in their language.
Very careful.
They describe the findings as damning. We're talking about a landscape filled with potential fraud, deep-seated nepotism, and just a near-total collapse of any kind of oversight.
One of our sources even describes it as cartels of mutual reinforcement.
Which is a terrifying phrase.
A terrifying phrase to hear in relation to a government program. So today, we're going to unpack how money that was meant to save children allegedly ended up funding casinos, drug rings, and kickback schemes between former prison mates.
And to do that right, we have to understand not just the alleged crimes, but the system that allowed them to happen in the first place.
Right.
We need to look at the philosophy of reducing barriers and how, in an attempt to be equitable, the county inadvertently, or maybe negligently, opened the door to what some of these sources are calling vultures.
So let's get into it. The $1.9 billion question. Where did all the money go?
To answer that, you really have to start with this shift in strategy. You have to go back to 2020. You have the COVID-19 pandemic, which, disrupted everything. And at the same time, you have the racial justice protests after the murder of George Floyd. There was this immense, palpable pressure on local governments to do something different.
Right. The mood wasn't just reform, it was replace. The sentiment was, the old systems aren't working, the police aren't working, we need new solutions, and we need them now.
Exactly. So the DCHS shifted its strategy to prioritize reducing barriers to contracting. The prevailing theory was that the government bureaucracy itself, the paperwork, the insurance requirements, the background checks, all of that was a barrier to equity. The idea was that these smaller, community-based organizations, often run by people with lived experience in the justice system, they were better equipped to help at-risk youth than the government was. They wanted to be, and this is the term they used, culturally competent.
Which, on paper, that sounds logical. If you want to stop gang violence, you want the money to get to the streets quickly, to the people who know the neighborhood. You don't want it stuck in some committee meeting for 6 months while people are getting hurt.
It does sound logical. And in a perfect world with high trust, it might even work. But here's where the execution completely devoured the intent. The method they chose involved distributing these emergency funds with a priority on speed, not fraud prevention. They used something called a hybrid payment model.
Okay, let's pause there. Hybrid payment model. That sounds like some innocent corporate jargon. But usually when the government invents a new payment model, things get messy. What does that actually mean here?
So traditionally, government contracts are often cost reimbursement, meaning you spend the money, you show me the receipt, I pay you back.
Simple enough.
Or they're pay for performance, you achieve a specific goal, and then I pay you. This hybrid model was essentially the department taking on the financial risk itself so that organizations with limited or even no government experience could get access to millions of dollars up front.
So they were fronting the cash.
Essentially, yes. They were giving them the money first.
Okay, and when you say the department took on the risk, usually in finance that means you have extra insurance or extra eyes on the deal.
Right.
But here, did they simply stop checking the receipts?
In many ways, yes. They assumed the risk that the money might not be used correctly in exchange for what they saw as the benefit of getting the money out the door fast.
Okay.
And the audit reveals that in 2024, DCHS scored nearly half of its 359 grantees as high risk.
Half. So you're saying 1 out of every 2 organizations they gave money to was flagged as high risk?
Correct. Now, normally if a bank lends money to a high-risk borrower, what do?
They watch them like a hawk. They ask for more documentation. They're checking in every week.
Exactly. You don't just hand them a bag of cash, pat them on the back, and say, good luck, see you next year.
Of course not.
But here, despite knowing these organizations were high risk, the oversight actually decreased.
Decreased. How is that even possible? You have more money going out to riskier groups, and you decide to watch them less.
Significantly less.
Yeah.
In 2023, the department had a target to conduct fiscal site visits for 33% of its grantees.
Oh, okay.
A fiscal site visit is basically an auditor showing up physically and saying, show me your books, show me the receipts, show me where the money actually went.
Right. And 33% seems low to begin with. That means 2/3 aren't getting checked, but fine. What percentage did they actually visit?
I'm guessing they missed the target. Maybe 20%.
Try lower.
10.
1%.
1%.
1.
So basically nobody was watching the store.
Effectively, yes.
Okay.
In-person oversight
Right.
just stopped. And the culture within the department became one where staff, quote, rarely expressed concern about fraud risk. They were just pushing money out the door so fast that installing any kind of safety net to monitor it was treated as an afterthought, or even worse, as an obstruction to the mission.
It's the classic move fast and break things mentality. But in this case, the things they were breaking were the bank and the public trust.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about sloppy paperwork or, forgetting to cross a T. The audit details some pretty shocking examples of where this money actually went.
It does. And I think before we get into the specific horror stories, and there really are horror stories, we need to define some terms.
That's a good idea.
Because the audit distinguishes between waste, abuse, and fraud. And those are not synonyms.
No, that's a crucial distinction. Waste is being careless, like buying too many staplers or overpaying for a service because you didn't shop around. It's bad stewardship, but it's not necessarily malicious.
Okay.
Abuse is misusing your position, giving a contract to your friend even if they aren't the best fit, but the work still gets done. Fraud is willful misrepresentation. It's lying. It's stealing. It is criminal intent. And the audit found plenty of potential fraud.
So let's look at the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
How does the money just disappear? If I give you $1 million, how do you steal it without me knowing?
Well, if I'm the county and I'm not checking your receipts, it's incredibly easy. One of the most basic ways they found was just document alteration.
Like literally changing the numbers.
Yes. The auditors found a specific instance where an invoice for $1,000 was physically altered to say $7,000.
You're kidding me.
And the county paid it.
Just with whiteout and a pen.
Essentially. It's crude. It's almost insulting in its simplicity.
Yeah.
But without anyone validating invoices against the actual service provider, it works. It's free money.
It's almost too stupid to work, but it did. Okay, what else?
Then you have the stipend black hole. This is a big one.
Okay.
The grants allowed for stipends to be paid to participants, maybe to help a struggling family with rent or food, which is a wonderful idea in theory.
Sure. Direct aid, keep people housed, keep them fed. That makes sense.
But there was no tracking. No names, no addresses, no verification. One organization planned to hand out $2,000 a month in unexplained cash stipends to parents. Another single individual received over $15,000 a month for 9 months.
$15,000 a month? That's not a stipend. That is a salary. That's a very good salary. That's $180,000 a year, tax-free.
But labeled as a stipend, with zero explanation of what it was for or who specifically received it, it bypassed all payroll taxes, all reporting. It's a phantom payment.
Wow.
And then there are the prepaid cards.
Oh, the gift cards. I've read about this.
Gift cards, debit cards bought in bulk. The idea is, again, direct aid. Here's a grocery card for a hungry family. but they were distributed without logs. It's functionally untraceable cash.
Right.
If I buy $10,000 worth of Visa gift cards and don't write down who I gave them to, well, I could have given them to the poor, or I could have put them in my own wallet, or sold them. The county has no way of knowing.
It's like they were actively trying to make it as easy as possible to steal. It's one thing to leave the door unlocked. It's another to take the door off its hinges and put up a sign that says, "Help yourself."
And then it gets more sophisticated. We have the subcontracting shell game. This is where we move from sloppy to structural.
Explain that.
So you have a nonprofit that gets a grant. Let's say they get $1 million. They budget, say, $63,000 for subcontractors, hiring an outside specialist for a specific job.
Okay.
But then, when the audit looks at the spending, they've actually spent $439,000 on subcontractors.
That's almost half their entire budget.
Exactly. They are funneling money to third parties that the county never vetted, never approved, and often didn't even know existed. One organization spent over $100,000 on unapproved subcontractors with zero allocation for it in their budget.
And this is where the for-profit leak comes in, right? Because we all assume this money is staying in the nonprofit world. We think it's going from charity A to charity B.
That is a dangerous assumption. The audit found that funds meant for nonprofits were leaking into for-profit companies, including out-of-state entities. One for-profit company received about $260,000.
So you have taxpayer money designated for charity and youth safety ending up in the bank accounts of private businesses, some of which aren't even in Washington state.
It was a free-for-all.
But, statistics and internal control failures can feel a bit abstract. It's easy to get lost in the numbers. I think we need to talk about the people. Because when you peel back the layers of these community organizations, the characters you find are, well, they're straight out of a crime novel.
They really are. And this brings us to what J425 calls the partners in crime. We have to talk about the case of Willard Jimerson and David Heppard. This is case study A in how to game the system.
This story is wild, so let's set the stage. Willard Jimerson was a King County employee. He wasn't just a grantee, he was on the inside.
Yeah.
He was a juvenile justice reform advocate, and he was hired despite having a past conviction for murder as a teenager.
That's right. And to be fair to the philosophy here, under the county's new Best Starts philosophy, that conviction was viewed as an asset.
How so?
He was a credible messenger.
Okay.
The idea is that someone who has been through the system, who has seen the inside of a cell, can connect with at-risk youth in a way a bureaucrat in a suit never could.
Okay, I get the theory. It makes a certain kind of sense. You need someone who speaks the language. But Jimerson wasn't just mentoring kids. He wasn't just a counselor.
No.
He was managing contracts. He was managing the Regional Peacekeepers Collective contracts. He was holding the checkbook.
And that is where the conflict of interest just explodes. Jimerson steers contracts to an organization called the Freedom Project. The executive director of the Freedom Project was a man named David Heppard.
And tell us about David Heppard.
Heppard was a nonprofit leader, but like Jimerson, he had a record past convictions for rape and witness intimidation.
And these two, they didn't just meet at some charity gala, did they?
No. They knew each other from McNeil Island Correction Center.
They served time together.
They did.
So let me get this straight. You have a convicted murderer working for the county, giving money to a convicted rapist running a nonprofit. And they are old prison buddies.
And the county didn't catch it. Or didn't care enough to look. The scheme was classic kickbacks.
Right.
Jimerson, from his perch inside the county, steered contracts to Heppard's organization. In return, Heppard's organization paid Jimerson and his private companies.
And these companies had just incredible names.
They did. You had entities with names like United Better Thinking and Street Up Cleaning.
United Better Thinking. You can't make this stuff up. It sounds like a shell company from a movie. Straight up clean. I mean, they were cleaning out the accounts, that's for sure.
And they paid Jimerson at least $323,000 through these companies.
Wow.
It gets more brazen. This was not a subtle operation. A witness actually overheard Jimerson texting Heppard instructions on what to say to county investigators to align their stories when questions finally started being asked.
Talk about cartels of mutual reinforcement. They were literally coaching each other on how to beat the audit.
It highlights the supreme irony of the credible messenger model.
Yeah.
As it was applied here. The county viewed their criminal histories as credentials for the job.
Right. As assets.
But they failed to monitor the significant financial risk of placing a convicted murderer in charge of distributing funds to a convicted rapist. It turned the Department of Community and Human Services into a piggy bank for an old prison alliance.
So what happened to them? Because usually when you steal over 300 grand from the government, you go to jail. Jimerson was fired, right?
He was fired.
Mm-hmm.
And he was fined $7,100.
Wait, pause. He took $323,000 and was fined $7,000.
Correct. He kept the vast majority of the money.
That's not a punishment. That's a commission. That's the cost of doing business. If I told you that you could steal $300,000 and your only penalty would be a $7,000 ticket, everyone would do it.
It certainly sends a message about the consequences or the lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
And Heppard, he closed down the Freedom Project. But reports suggest he almost immediately resurfaced with a new nonprofit called the Black Rose Collective to go after more funding.
Because why stop? The system clearly pays. If the fine is pennies on the dollar, you'd be crazy to stop.
Right.
But if Jimerson and Heppard were running a kickback scheme, this next case study feels even more dangerous. We need to talk about the sacred spaces and the Safeway blue tents.
This is a visual many people in Seattle might recognize. If you drove by the Rainier Beach Safeway, you saw them, these blue pop-up awnings.
Mm-hmm.
This was funded by the county and by Seattle Public Schools as a sacred space for nonviolence. It was supposed to be a community safety hub.
And it was run by a woman named Marty Jackson.
Right, Marty Jackson. She was a prominent nonviolence activist. She was the head of SE Network Safety Net.
She was held up as a hero. I remember the news clips. The media portrayed her as this mother figure standing between the bullets and the babies. She was sort of the Mother Teresa of Rainier Beach.
She was the face of the community-led safety initiative. But according to federal indictments and the J425 reporting, that public image was a mask, a very effective one.
Uh-oh.
The allegations are that Jackson was actually running a massive fentanyl and weapons ring.
A fentanyl ring operating out of a nonviolence tent funded by the government.
That is the allegation. And when the feds finally moved in, the hero mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. They found piles of cash, weapons, and 800,000 fentanyl pills.
800,000 pills. That's not a dealer. That's a distributor. That's enough to kill half the city.
And here is the dark irony that the sources point out. Council members would go to these press conferences at the Safeway.
Right, for the photo ops.
Or the photo ops. They would stand under those blue tents and talk about the darkness of gun violence. But that darkness was allegedly sitting right next to them wearing a Be Safe Bro t-shirt.
It gives you chills. It really does. And how does someone like this get so entrenched? How do they get the contracts with the schools? Because she wasn't just at Safeway. She was inside the schools.
And this brings us back to nepotism. The sources describe a family business operating within this nonprofit industrial complex.
Yeah.
Marty Jackson's sister, Annie Patu, was the principal at Rainier Beach High School.
The very school that contracted Jackson's organization.
Exactly. So the sister hires the sister.
And it extends further than that, doesn't it?
It does. Their brother, Saul Patu, was involved in a scandal at Roosevelt High School. He was an assistant football coach. He managed to get a sole source contract funneling $160,000 to his own LLC while he was recruiting for the team.
It's incredible. It's not just one bad apple. It's an entire orchard. You have these families and networks treating public safety funds like a personal ATM.
And remember, and this is so crucial, this money was supposed to replace the police. That was the whole pitch.
Defund the police, fund the community.
Right. In many of these schools, police officers, school resource officers, they were removed. And these violence interrupters were hired in their place.
So you replace a regulated, albeit imperfect, law enforcement presence with an alleged fentanyl ring.
You swapped a badge for a cartel.
Hi.
That's the harsh reality the sources are pointing to.
It leaves you speechless. But we have to keep moving, because we haven't even talked about the vultures and the no-shows yet.
This brings us to Community Passageways, or CP. This is one of the biggest players in this space. Founded by Dominique Davis, they demanded millions for culturally competent solutions. They were the heavy hitters.
And they got millions. They were the darlings of the funding world.
They did. But their internal controls were apparently non-existent. Their finance director, Susanna Tantico, embezzled nearly $1 million.
$1 million? How does a finance director steal $1 million without anyone noticing?
She was treating the nonprofit's bank account like her own personal purse. The reports detailed direct withdrawals at casinos, splurges at Nordstrom.
She was withdrawing cash at a casino, using the nonprofit's card.
Yes. And this went on while the organization was supposed to be saving lives. And that's the part that hurts the most. It's not just the theft, it's the absence. There is a specific tragedy mentioned in the reports involving a student named Amar Murphy Payne.
I read about this. This broke my heart.
Amar Murphy Payne was a student at Garfield High School. He was murdered in the parking lot. Community Passageways was paid millions to be there. Their job, their specific contractual obligation, was to provide security, mentorship, and safe passage for these kids.
But on the day he was killed,
The CP team was a no-show.
where were they?
Reportedly, they were at a conference at Lemon Field.
So the kid dies alone in a parking lot because the safety team that we paid millions for is at a conference.
It highlights the lethality of this negligence. When you pay for a service that isn't delivered in the corporate world, maybe you lose profit. Maybe a product launch fails. But when you pay for safety that isn't delivered here, children die. The no-show isn't just a breach of contract. It's a breach of a moral duty.
And then there's Renegades for Life. This one, I mean, the name alone should have been a red flag. Renegades?
Renegades for Life was hired as a subcontractor under that regional peacekeepers collective we mentioned. It was run by a man named Salim Robinson.
Let me guess. He had a record.
He was a convicted sex offender in indecent exposure and was facing felony insurance fraud charges at the time. And get this, he faked his social work credentials.
And nobody checked.
King County did not conduct background checks. The audit and all the reporting make this crystal clear. They adopted a hands-off approach.
Unbelievable.
They allowed people who legally could not work in a public school, who wouldn't be allowed to sweep the floors or serve lunch because of their record, to work one-on-one with vulnerable youth in crisis.
It's a complete abdication of responsibility. They just handed the money over and looked the other way. It's almost like they didn't want to know.
And that leads us to the bigger picture. Why? Why was this allowed to happen, and why is it so hard to stop? J425 uses the term omerta.
The code of silence.
Exactly. We are talking about cartels of mutual reinforcement. Think about the position of a whistleblower in this system.
Yeah.
If you are a lower-level employee at one of these nonprofits and you see money disappearing, who do you tell?
Right. Your boss might be a known murderer or connected to a fentanyl ring. You're not exactly going to HR.
The sources mentioned that employees were terrified. They were scared for their lives. It creates a system where silence is enforced by fear. And then you have the government's response, or lack thereof.
The county auditor, Kimber Waltmanson, she seemed pretty fed up in her report.
She was. She called the failures alarming. But what's even more concerning to me is the pushback she apparently received. DCHS and the county executive's office were accused of resisting the controls.
Resisting oversight.
Yes. Even after these findings came out, contracts were extended. Seattle Public Schools extended Community Passageways contract, even after the embezzlement news broke, and even after the no-show reports.
Why? Why would you extend a contract with a group that let a kid die and had their finance director steal $1 million? That defies all logic.
Because of the fire hose. The philosophy is that the money must flow. To turn off the tap is seen as politically dangerous. It's seen as inequitable. There is this deep fear among politicians that if you cut funding, you will be accused of abandoning the community. So the access to funding becomes more important than the efficacy of the program.
So it's political cowardice.
It's political calculation.
Yeah.
We have to be seen spending money on this problem. Whether the money actually solves the problem becomes secondary.
Former council member Kathy Lambert had a pretty grim prediction about all this money.
She did. She suggested the public may never know the exact amount that was lost. We're looking at a few audits of a few programs. But remember that 1.9 billion figure. The potential loss across the entire ecosystem could be in the tens of millions. It's gone, vaporized.
And the auditor eventually had to call for outside help, right? She couldn't do it alone.
Yes. She called for the FBI and the ombuds because the internal DCHS investigations were being delayed or obstructed.
Wow.
That is a massive red flag. When your own auditor says, I can't trust you to investigate yourselves, you have a systemic crisis. You have complete breakdown of governance.
So what does this all mean for us, for the listener? Because it's easy to get angry, but what is the takeaway here?
It means we have to reckon with the cost of good intentions without guardrails. We aren't just talking about tax dollars wasted. We are talking about services not delivered.
We mentioned earlier that youth gun violence hit record highs in 2024.
Exactly. The county spent $16 million specifically to stop youth gun violence through these very programs, and violence went up.
So it failed.
Miserably. The safety net was full of holes. And those holes were created, in part, by the very people paid to weave the net.
It's a betrayal. That's the only word for it. You promise safety, you promise mentorship, and you deliver fraud and fentanyl.
And it leaves the listener, the taxpayer, and the parent in a terrible position. You want to support at-risk youth. You want to support equity. No one wants to see kids in prison. But the mechanism that was built to do that has been captured by what the sources call vultures.
It's a tragedy, and it leaves us with a really, really uncomfortable question.
It does, and this is the thought I want to leave with you, the listener. The sources pose a dilemma. Have we built a system where the experts in youth safety have a vested interest in the continuation of violence?
Meaning, if the violence stops, the money stops.
Precisely. If the problem is solved, the fire hose turns off. If the police return, the violence interrupter becomes redundant. So is this just incompetence? Is it just sloppy accounting? Or is it a perfectly designed system of graft that requires a baseline of chaos to justify its own existence?
That is a terrifying thought. That the chaos is the point. That the disorder is the business model.
It is. And until the county values the lives of its children more than the velocity of its grant funding, nothing is going to change.
We're going to leave it there. That's a lot to process. That's the deep dive for today. Read the audit, look at the sources, we'll have them linked, and decide for yourself. Thanks for listening.
Stay curious and stay critical.